but for you, I say we, I'm just here on the stage to compare you through it. We have a short introduction, a fireside chat with Olga and Mumbai. Olga Hassan Zayed, Chair of the Supervisory Body, Mumbai Diagne, Vice Chair of the Supervisory Body. You're going to talk us through the work that's been achieved this year, last year, and what's ahead. And then we're going to have a quick scene refresh, and we're going to hear 5 interesting interventions and perspectives from 5 very talented people who I will introduce when they're up here, and reflections from that from 2 of our other supervisory body members. So, without any further waiting, let's get going. Olga, tell us, what are the key moments for Article 6 this year? What have they been for the mechanism? And what have you achieved in this very busy year you've had?
Thank you very much. Very good question. The mic is working, right? You can hear me. Okay, good. Thank you very much. Of course, a weighted question, because we have achieved a lot. Really, I think, incredible amount in the 18 months that we have been working. We've taken over 100 decisions. We have prepared full project cycle package. Full projects can start being implemented, including sustainable development tool and grievance procedures. No? Okay. I'm sorry. I thought that was a voice of approval. It wasn't a voice of approval. I'm sorry. No. Then I'll repeat myself. We have achieved, in my personal view, more than anybody could have expected us to achieve, because we have prepared a full project cycle package, full. With 2 components only that haven't been formally approved, because we have put them out for public consultation in order for public to engage, in order for stakeholders to be able to have the time to review them. And that's over 100 decisions. And in addition to that, we have prepared 2 fundamental pieces that are setting up how this mechanism will work, which are the recommendations on methodologies and recommendations on removals. They have been approved by the SB. They have been forwarded to the CMA. And now it's up to the parties to approve them and to allow us to proceed with the work on implementation, operationalization of the mechanism from next year. There is, I think it's, let's skip the next slide for later. But in terms of what we have done, it's over 100 decisions. And we have worked as humans, we have worked every meeting beyond what anyone's work day is like. We have worked 10, 12, 14 hours days just to be able to deliver this package to the CMA. So we really rely on the consideration and support of the parties to make it possible for us to proceed.
Thanks very much. So let's talk about what's going to happen next year. And Olga Mumbai, maybe you can talk about the work that we'll see in 2024.
Thank you, and thank you for organizing this meeting. As said by Olga, we have done a lot to prepare the activity cycle. We have 2 recommendations, one on the methodology and another one on removals. And only the adoption of at least the methodology may make this mechanism be operational next year. But it's not just adopting those recommendations on the methodology, the requirement for developing and assessing the methodologies, and also the activities involving removals. Even if the CMA adopts them, there will be additional work, because in the recommendations, you have seen them, there are some details that the supervisory body needs to address. But in addition to that, the supervisory body needs also to have methodology in place to be able to have submission of project by the PPs. And to get that, we have already started to work on the CDM methodologies. But at any time, based on the requirement on the development and assessment of methodology, any project participant or any party may submit new methodology that will be assessed based on that. We have already started to put on place the different panels we need in terms of methodology, in terms of accreditation. We need also to accredit DOEs. It's a work. We have already prepared the activity cycle, how to accredit them, how to assess them, and all of that. But we need to accredit those ones. We need also to, and it's a proposal that is in our report, to set up the DNA forum, because the role of the DNA will be completely different in the 6.4 than in the CDM. And they will be involved in the functioning of this mechanism. We need to organize them, to build their capacity, to organize the national arrangement within the country. There is a lot to do. And also, we need to operationalize the transition of CDM project. We have already put on place the procedure and the standard for that. We have some application, but we need to operationalize all of that. Meaning that if the recommendations are adopted, if some elements in relation to the DNA forum, all of that is adopted by the CMA, we may expect by the second semester of next year to start to have some methodology in place and starting to receive requests for registration of project. And that will follow all the process of validation and also getting that from the project participant perspective. So there is a lot of work, but the first step will be the adoption by the CMA of the recommendation and some requests in our report. After that, we will have time to work on that. Thank you.
Thanks. It is a lot, and it's, you know, it's really great to see the pace at which work is happening now. Do you want to jump in on that one, Olga, or should we move to the next point?
Pace.
Well,
We've worked very, very hard. And by the way, we're not alone here. We have a number of members. We have Maria, Christian, Piotr, Martin, Kazo, and they all would confirm we worked very, very hard. We hope that SB will continue working as hard, and then we will be able to fulfill the rest of the work that Baya has mentioned on the tools, on the guidances, that will move the mechanism.
okay, great. So we've heard what's happened this year. We've heard what's coming next year, and this might be a good moment, since we're good for time, to just see if anyone's got any questions about where we're at, process questions, and clarifying questions around the work to come.
Just to add to that also, there are two important elements that are under consultation. We have the Sustainable Development Tool. We need to get feedback and adopt it because it's part of the activity cycle, as well as the grievance procedure. Those are very important. They were not in the previous system. We will have it in the 6.4. And the one we had on the Sustainable Development Tool under the CDM was voluntary. This one is a mandatory one. So we need to get feedback coming from stakeholders and approve them to be part of the package.
Right, and if I understand rightly, that consultation just closed and you'll be
Exactly.
looking at that early next year?
Yeah.
Right.
And if I may add, because I've received already many questions, and I'll just preemptively clarify that we always welcome feedback, and I think stakeholders can continue commenting if they feel that they haven't had the time. Then they can continue sending in the comments. The first meeting of the year next year is in early March. So there's really sufficient time, and we wanted to put these documents out for public consultation in a period when we have the longest gap between the meetings, because very often people tell us we don't have enough time, don't have sufficient time to engage with the documents because it's too short. And the reason for this is that we have very limited time between the meetings. We need to open for the consultation, we need to close the consultation, and we need to process the inputs and start the meeting. So that really is very limited time. The longest gap we normally have between the meetings is between the last meeting of the year before the COP and the next meeting of the next year. So that's how it was timed, just so that there is this longest gap and people have the time to, stakeholders, organizations, institutions, have the time to prepare proposals, have really spent quality time with it, and then receive quality inputs. And there are quite a few elements there that if you watch our webcast, that we have we needed inputs on. Like we invited, we specifically we were mentioning that we need inputs on these issues because they're quite complex and we feel responsibility to deliver on them. So it's very important that the stakeholders engage in them. And also another question that I get a lot on this is whether it's possible to proceed without this element. And the most important one is, of course, the Sustainable Development Tool. It's part of the project approval cycle. It's impossible for a project to proceed without undertaking sustainable development evaluation, and that evaluation being validated by an independent entity. So it's part of the cycle that is mandatory. The cycle would not be operationalized without it. That's already in the framework, in the regulatory framework that we have approved.
Thanks.
Right, so thanks for that clarification, and that's important for everyone then to watch out early next year for the progress on those items. So if you have any quick questions, we can take them, and then, is there a roving mic? And then we'll move on to the next session of this side event. So when you ask a question, if you can just introduce who you are, that will help us.
Hi, I'm Olivia Tuchten. I'm from Prometheum Carbon, a climate change advisory firm in South Africa. I was just wondering if there is any chance that the deadline for applying to transition CDM projects to Article 6.4 may be extended. I know it's the end of this year.
I'll try taking this question. Maybe Maya can help. It's not a question to the SB. It's a question to CMA. The deadline is set in the CMA decision. Would that be your understanding, Maya?
Yes, I think from the project proponent, it's a very simple process. It's just to fill a form to say I want to transition. And I want to use the CDM methodology or whatever new methodology. It's only what is requested at this point. After that, there will be additional documentation. The deadline is the end of this month. It's why we are pushing, and we have put on the website and push all PPs, and we have already provided the list of eligible CDM project for transition. It's just filling that form. So I push PPs to fill that form, but that will not mean that it's an engagement. You just wanted to transition, and all the process will be conducted later. But I don't think will be an extension of that date. But it's up to the CMA to take whatever decision.
Thanks. So if we are ready, we'll move to the next part of this session. And we'll, oh, we have one more question waving at us over there. You just take, can you get the mic to that far corner? And
Thank you. I'm Tomo Harada. I'm from Norwegian University of Life Sciences. And yesterday, during the contact group, some states have had concerns with kind of lack of scientific guidance in informing the works of the supervisory body. And I'm just wondering what you might like to see next year or the year after in terms of engaging with, scientific experts and communities on some of the issues that the subsidiary body might be dealing with. Thank you.
Yes. In taking our different decisions, we rely on submissions. Submissions coming from party, institutions, scientists. Everyone can make submission, and we have received more than 400 submissions, and all submissions were considered. But we need to recognize that we have the supervisory body, but during all these 18 months, we had not the technical panel that are additional experts supporting the supervisory body in assessing all the different elements, taking into account all the inputs. We did it ourselves with the support of the Secretariat. We think next year we'll have, in addition to the expert within the supervisory body, the Secretariat will have the MED panel as well as the other supporting elements. And the only thing we can add is trying to have a more aggressive communication to push the different scientists to make proposals. But you need to recognize that it's very tough to take into consideration all those comments that are sometimes contradicting, because depending to whether some are scientists, some are manufacturers, some are politics, and all of that. But in any case, we will try to have an infrastructure that allow for a deepest assessment of the different contributions we receive, including from science.
thank you. I think what we'll do now is we'll move to the next session. At the end of the next session, we'll pick up further questions. So I'd like you to express your thanks to the Chair and the Vice-Chair for this part of the session. And I'd ask our 2 supervisory body members and our 5 panelists to come to the podium.
Sorry, making confused.
So now that everybody's settled, this is the second part of our session. where we'll have some perspectives on the work of the 6.4 body, and then hear responses to those perspectives from two members of the body, and try to get a nice discussion going on some important elements, and then turn to the audience for some questions and answers, and people who are online will be joining in those questions and answers. So I'm going to shuffle some papers around here and try and introduce everybody properly, and excuse the frog in my throat, which means I have a cough. So our supervisory body members, who will be our respondents today to our panel discussion, I'd like to welcome Christine Cui, who's an alternate member and has been working on the Sustainable Development Tool as the Sustainable Development Tool Working Group Chair, and Maria Argishi, who's working as the Removal Guidance Co-Chair in the work that has been done this year. And then our panelists, turning in order of how they'll be speaking. I'd like to welcome Mr. Sonam Tashi, who is a representative of the DNA for Bhutan, and who is a long-time engager in Article 6, in the work of Article 6. Ruben Manakora, who's the Assistant Director of Global Partnerships and is the Article 6 lead for Singapore in negotiations. Ms. Pazang Doma Sherpa, who's a former co-chair of the FWG for the LCIPP, so that's a test of your knowledge of acronyms, and is the Executive Director of SIPRED, and who's representing here the important perspective of Indigenous communities, Indigenous peoples and local communities. We've also got on the panel, I'd like to welcome Ms. Karen Holm-Olsen, who's a senior advisor and coordinator, carbon market coordinator at the Copenhagen Climate Change Centre, and has been working on sustainable development aspects for many, many years, and is here to talk with us about that. And finally, we'll hear from Mr. Andrea Bonanzi, who is the Director of International Policy at AITA, being our private sector representative tonight, and talking with us about the private sector perspective. So I'd like to ask Sonam to kick us off with a short intervention focusing on the lessons that we've already learned about the 6.4 mechanism and the issues around capacity building and the opportunities that 6.4 can bring for countries who are hosting activities and giving tips to other prospective DNAs. So now I'm over to you for your wisdom.
Thank you, Amy. And if you're the same Amy, I remember, nice to see you again. Who was there with UNFCCC? Nice to see a lot of Article 6 friends here. So just to share, my country experience, I think it was interesting when we started to see after Glasgow on how do we start implementing Article 6, and then what drew attention was Para 26, the participation responsibilities, where you have to identify a designated national authority. We thought it was, it's a simple job, you inform UNFCCC, but later when you're looking at the supervisory or the CDM, it was the supervisory reports, we just realized that many countries still haven't it identified. Right? So this is interesting, again, from a capacity institution building experience, especially for developing countries, is this, and then the second part of this was even more interesting for us was the participation responsibility requires us, parties to make two statements. The first is, I just noted down so that I don't forget, is about how participation in the mechanism contributes to sustainable development and so on, and we have to inform the supervisory body. The second statement is again how it's in line with our NDCs and long-term strategy. And this is where, again, it's very interesting. We got in touch with the Secretariat, and then we thought there'll be a template, a standard format, and then we said there's nothing right now, that they're working on it. So these are just, again, country experiences. So this is something which, again, we'd like to hear from others also. Do you make a one-paragraph statement, a two-pager, or a 100-pager academic statement saying that what we are going to do? But so this is one, just meeting the requirements of Article 6 as what the decision texts are. Then after that, again, within the country, besides the communications with UNFCCC is again to do with the institutional arrangements in the country. The first thing that we needed was a legal basis. And we have carbon market rules of 2023. that basically outlines the institutional arrangements. For instance, who will do the authorization, which public entity or government entity will be responsible for the corresponding adjustments, and then also decisions on who's going to manage the registries for us. And this brings us to the registry experience of my country. A lot of discussion whether we should go wait for the UNFCCC registry, the mechanism registry, or whether we should go for our own national registry. A decision was taken by the government that, for which there's no time to explain everything, but a decision was taken that we'll have our own national registry, and this is what we've been working on, building up our own infrastructure and so on. And then the part of this now, this is something to largely to do with the smaller countries and all, where a lot of the mitigation activities may not have the scale and then may not be viable from a business transaction point of view. And for that, the government of Bhutan decided that we'll have a Bhutan Climate Fund. Basically, it will aggregate a lot of the mitigation activities. It will raise money to support mitigation, and the sale of the credits will be used to support climate action in the country, for instance, for adaptation and so on. So this is, this is a little bit unique, a bit different from what's there in the guidelines. And then also part of this whole Article 6 building up the institutions, the capacities were also this, that the government has also taken the decision that the proceeds earned from any future carbon credit sales, it has to be through our national digital ID initiative that, and the use of blockchain. We are looking at how the proceeds can be given to all the citizens, so it's basically a sharing of from the monetization of the environment efforts of the country. And then in terms of the markets, knowing that as a small country that we may not, that we will have to sell credits, we have to engage in partnerships. We have been talking to a few countries on entering into Article 6.2 bilateral cooperation, and again this is an overlap of 6.4, 6.2, things that, so this is again some of the ongoing discussions we've been engaging in. The positive list of projects, it's under discussion right now. And if everything was just domestic action, it's easy, but this is where I just want to highlight, it's nowhere there in the climate text, but a lot of the Article 6 activities is going to be done by the private sector, including the countries that we're talking to. They've made it very clear that it's going to be private sector led. And then this brings us to the overlap of trade and climate rules, regulations, and convergence of all this, right? So, and this is, I would say a challenge, but one of the regulatory issues that countries have to sort this out. You can have a joint committees, you can have a positive list of projects, and what you allow for Article 6 participation, but then the issue is how do you sort out your trade and investment rules? For instance, in my country, we are saying, okay, energy sector could be one, renewable and wind and so on. But when you look at the fine print of our energy policy, there are certain investment restrictions, foreign investment equity caps, and how do you deal with this? So this is where, again, from a nation's capacity building, from a DNA's perspective, these are things which, it goes beyond just the mandate of a DNA. We have to talk to our trade and commerce industry colleagues in sorting out all this. And then overall, when it comes to the issue of capacity building, what we've realized over the years, and I think we've heard this in the negotiating rooms also, is that it cannot be a one-off 1-week training or 2-week training program. It really has to be structured for each country based on the capacity of different countries. So, like in my country's case, for instance, to do with the registry capacity, we were quite surprised to know that we could do it because there were certain investment agencies run by the government that had the capacity, the technical competency to build that up there. And so again, when it comes to capacity building also, it really cannot be one size fits all. Each country has to make its own assessment and then really decide where the focus has to be. And but then overall, yes, in terms of capacity building, is there need for understanding of Article 6 on what has to be done? Yes, that is something which may be a standardized manual, which we're again hearing in the room. It would be good to have all these standard operating procedures so that a lot of these things can be standardized across countries and all. But thereafter, you will have
Sonam,
to...
I'm terribly sorry. I wonder if you can start to wrap it up so we can have Maria respond.
Thank you, Amy. So at the end, each country, besides the general capacity building program, specific ones based on your own domestic abilities and capabilities, you'll have to start planning it. Thank you.
Thanks. And so you've got a really broken out, comprehensive response there from Sonam. And Maria, perhaps you can jump in to respond.
On theme, I continue to have mic issues at this COP. So I think it's very valuable to hear what Sonam said, because knowing that a DNA reached out to say, is there a form that we can fill out to show that we meet all of the participation requirements, and then the answer was there is not a form yet, at least tells me that maybe we need to add something to the supervisory body's work program next year. But also, I think there is significant capacity building efforts that are already underway. Also, keeping in mind that there is still significant capacity building that is needed across the board in many countries, especially developing countries, and their ability to access a mechanism like the Article 6.4. I'm not going to lie, as someone who has been working on the mechanism for 18 months, it's disappointing that Bhutan has chosen to kind of go with their own national registry and national arrangements. At least to me, that indicates that the slower we are in operationalizing and implementing the mechanism, the more likely it is that countries will decide to pursue their own arrangements instead of utilizing this UN mechanism. And so I'll keep it there with my response. I don't know if...
Thanks, Maria. Okay, so let's turn now to Ruban. Ruban, I'd really like you, if you can, to focus on how the 6.4 mechanism can help both buyer and seller countries achieve their NDC, and give that buyer government perspective that is one that you're familiar with.
Thanks, Amy, and thanks Sonam as well as Maria for breaking the ice and starting the discussions. So just to share about Singapore's perspectives. Singapore is a buyer. Our alternative energy disadvantage status means that we can't get to net zero without, by our own means, and we rely on international collaboration, of which carbon ITMOS is one mechanism to achieve it. But really, from Singapore's perspective, we see 6.4 or Article 6 as a whole, and for the purposes of this panel, in three aspects. So the first is, of course, 6.4 is a mechanism in which that we look to access high-quality carbon credits. Right? And this is absolutely crucial. So for context, currently Singapore, through our carbon tax regime, allow carbon tax liable companies, which covers 80% of our economy, to offset 5% of their tax liabilities to internationally recognized carbon credits. And when we say internationally recognized carbon credits, we mean carbon credits that align with international standards. So currently, we reference CORSIA, which has already been established and is running and has been running for a few years, as to what are high quality credits that we can reference. And we have published earlier this month, or last month rather, a list of 7 principles that we consider absolutely crucial to maintain the integrity of carbon credits. And similarly, we will look to the 6.4 mechanism to what it recognizes to be high quality credits, and should it meet, and I really hope it does, then Singapore will look to the 6.4 mechanism to access these credits. The second perspective on which we look at 6.4 is really on standards, processes, and infrastructure. 6.4 is a centralized mechanism, and with that comes a whole host of machinery. Right? I think Ambai shared earlier about the mechanism registry and how the mechanism registry plays a complementary function to the international registry that many countries can look to. And ultimately, this feeds the goal to what Sonam said earlier of how do we increase participation? How do we get more countries to participate effectively in carbon markets so that we collectively can get to 1.5, right? And I think the 6.4 mechanism plays a crucial aspect to that, because with that, when you increase participation, what you also increase is complementary. You create a complementary mechanism with 6.2, right? And just to pick up what Maria said, I completely agree. But also, just to add some nuance to it as well, from Singapore's perspective, we see 6.2 and 6.5 as complementary mechanisms, where both buyers and sellers can participate in both mechanisms to achieve their goals, right? So for under 6.2, so I'll cite an example for methodologies. So under 6.2, Singapore leverages voluntary market standards because those are out there. The wheel, it has already been running for a while. We pick methodologies that we deem to be credible, and we align from there. And similarly, 6.4 can do that as well, right? So we can look to what are credible methodologies to add 6.4, and we can build on that. So that's the second aspect of how the multiple mechanisms can be complementary. And the third aspect is really, with the development of 6.4, is what you have is a platform to achieve synergies. And to achieve synergies among not only parties, but also the multiple ecosystem players, that can be part of it. So just to cite an example of infrastructure. So as highlighted by Sonam and the Bhutan example, where you have your national registries that don't choose to leverage the international registries, right? But if you have a critical mass of parties that leverage the international registries, that have the national registries, what you would need is a mechanism that promotes transparency throughout these multiple mechanisms, right? So in that aspect, for example, Singapore has worked with the World Bank and AITA to set up the Carbon Action Data Trust, right? Which recognizes that mechanisms can function alongside each other. And where they do, we build systems to build that complementary and that transparency so that we collectively achieve what we need to do, which is build a high integrity and robust carbon markets collectively, regardless of whether it's 6.2 or 6.4. Thanks.
Thanks, Ruben. Maria, do you want to respond to Ruben there?
I think I appreciate that Ruben kind of highlighted where the mechanism can play a role in terms of Singapore's frameworks, and I have to say that I'm closely following what Singapore is doing because I find it quite interesting and fascinating, the level of cooperation across, and I'm also following what several other countries are doing, including Japan and Thailand and South Africa in terms of what they've set out, because the approaches may be similar, but they all differ a little bit, and it just highlights the differences in how different countries or different parties to Paris are choosing to approach the operationalization of the entirety of Article 6. And just underscores, again, how we need this mechanism to be up and running as quickly as possible to enable all of that wonderful will to cooperate to flow towards the 1.5 that we need across both suppliers and demand centers. So, stop there.
Thanks. So let's turn now to Pasang, if we may, and perhaps you can talk with us about how the 6.4 body can meaningfully engage and partner with IPs and LCs in its work.
Yeah. Thank you so much. And I'm not the expert in 6.4, so bear with that one. But it's very, very good to hear, the process and mechanisms and the way forward, especially building the capacity and engagements of the other stakeholders. So which is one of the part that I feel like it's a positive vibe of moving ahead. And we also, in the process of this, this operationalization of new carbon credit mechanisms, it is very important to see that indigenous peoples are not just seen as beneficiaries. Generally, in most of the time in the climate discussion, is indigenous people are more seen like vulnerable, like beneficiaries, and we often forget that the indigenous peoples play as a key actors. and the role and contribution through Indigenous people knowledge and cultural values that interconnected with the landscape where you are brought up, and often missed out, because we often see like a forest as a tree, but for Indigenous peoples, forest is not just a tree. Forest has a symbiotic relation, culturally, socially, spiritually connected. And existence of forest is existence of Indigenous peoples and other way around. And and then also it's very important, like although this 6.4 now we are discussing, but the engagement on this result-based payment or carbon discussion is started long time back. I was fully aware that I was also part of this discussion on the REDD Plus since end of the 2007 or 8, and it's very, very important to understand how this Cancun safeguards function, because we discuss a lot about Cancun safeguards, we discuss a lot about social and environmental safeguards in the implementation of REDD Plus, and still it has not gone as expected, right? So it's very important also see like this in the implementation of REDD Plus, what has been the lesson learned for us, challenges and opportunities, and especially contribution, acknowledging as Indigenous people and local communities as key actors, and instead of pushing forward, acknowledging and bringing in the table for discussion, and which is very, very pertinent. And then another part is also, it's very important that we understand that carbon mechanisms, it is very important for based on the human right-based approach, because it's a life and death matters of Indigenous people. Anything to do with the forest and landscape is very important to respect the fundamental rights of Indigenous people in line with the international treaty and convention, including the Paris agreements. So all these agreements, what we have already done, it is very important to reflect back. When I was a co-chair in the FWG, I remember we have done the assessments in the engagement of Indigenous people and local communities in the climate discourse. And the result of that assessment done around the world in 197 countries, I believe like a very, very low engagement of Indigenous people. So we also learn from our own experience and then the assessment of the different results, that how we can build on this engagement, because engagement of Indigenous peoples is not the threat, actually it's an opportunity, and it will help to build the ownership for implementation and win-win situation. In the absence of that, it will not have a sustainability. And I was very happy to hear also the 6.4 also deals with the sustainable developments. And how could we move ahead sustainable development goals without recognizing the role and contribution of Indigenous people? And dealing with the basis part of, I just recently visited a few countries in South Asia. I was part of the team leaders for Indigenous Resilient to Climate First study. And that study clearly indicates, it's not really directly, but indirectly it's related, because Indigenous resilience is based on all these drivers like knowledge, values, cultural practices, customer institution, governance system, as a drivers for building the resilience. Because we believe that sustainability will be sustainable if we build the resilience of Indigenous people and local communities. But most of the case, the resilience is deteriorating, is more vulnerable, and Indigenous people becoming more vulnerable despite the role and contribution we have for resilience. So that is one of the reasons. The basis for vulnerability I have found in my study, recent study, that not having the enable environment, enable in a way like legal and academic and the legal recognition of the attachments of the symbiotic relation of the customary lands and resources. So that is why it's very important that this is hope for Indigenous peoples, recognition of our values and practices, and also the legal and promotion, protection and legal recognition of the attachment, symbiotic relationship of Indigenous people and with the lands and the resources they have been living for generations. Thank you.
Thank you, and I think that was a really clear communication of the centrality of engagement as partners in the mechanism. And Kristin, perhaps you'd like to respond.
Sure. Thanks very much, Amy, and good evening, colleagues. And thank you very much for that wonderful intervention. So based on what you said, I think I'm happy to say that I believe that the discussions at the SB level are quite aligned with what you've been saying. I'm sure many of you know that we have had discussions on the development of a sustainable development tool, and the draft that we have produced has been out for consultation. I believe the consultation window, public consultation, I believe the window was from November 3rd to December 1st. And within that tool, we do have some principles and criteria for those principles that were pulled from best practice experiences, and it includes a principle on Indigenous people as well as human rights. And so for us, we agree with you in terms of the engagement of Indigenous peoples, and we want to make sure that we can foster that type of engagement. So through the SD tool, I believe that that's one avenue for engagement. There are other avenues as well, but I think that's one. So I'll leave it there, Amy. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And, you know, this conversation so far has just shown just how many issues the 6.4 work covers that are so central to the way to do carbon markets in this environment. So let's turn now to Karen. Karen's worked for many years on the issues of sustainable development. Talk to us about the work ongoing at the moment.
Yeah, so just to comment on the many years, it's 20 years, I think, starting with my PhD and developing the CDM SD tool methodology. And now still working on this topic. So just looking back a bit on the history and where we come from and where we are going, if we look at the CDM Sustainable Development Tool, it had a lot of shortcomings. As Mbai has said, one of the improvements, and there are many improvements, is that it's mandatory. The other one was voluntary. Just pointing out that it's voluntary for the PPs, though the developers actually not for the host countries, because they have a national prerogative to decide themselves if they want to, what to do with that assessment. I think that's an important distinction, so that there's continued respect for the national prerogative. Always was there, still is there. So I think overall, if we look at the big picture, there's a movement from periphery, sustainable development, you called it a co-benefit, and now it's at the core of how we define integrity. It's environmental integrity, but it's also social integrity, and it's the reputation of the whole mechanism which is at stake. If you do not get it right, if you violate Indigenous people, local communities, it's not good, and it's not the way you should do high quality carbon credits. And now we have a tool, or a draft one, and if I can speak a little, I actually have several points. I don't know if I can get through them all, but there are the improvements. There's also two things that I think are, it's not perfect, and I think there's still room for some improvements. But in the context of sustainable development being a shall requirement coming from the Paris Agreement, it always was a shall requirement, but it wasn't really delivered on that. At least we didn't necessarily know if there was or not, because it was not monitored and verified and validated. Now it will be. But because it is a shall requirement, I think we have two challenges, which you could say are also opportunities to get it, the race to the top that we would like to see, the 6.4 mechanism being the best-in-class standard. That's what we want. We want the 6.4, or I think that's what we want. It's what I'd like to see. I mean, UN, the global mechanism, but also setting a best practice standards for all the carbon markets. We also have a voluntary carbon market. But just to name the challenges, we have some new methodological that's the science coming from IPCC and others, that it's not just about cherry picking, quantifying the positive impacts. It's also about assessing the negative impacts. and what are the synergies and the trade-offs. So if I take one example of removals, which is the other challenge because it's not quite covered yet, at least particularly the tech-based ones. They're immature technologies. We don't have a lot of experience, so what should be the safeguards? How should we assess sustainable development? But there could be positive impacts. In some ways, it could be BECS, to take a removal technology. So you obviously have positive impacts for for climate mitigation, but you could also have issues related to the bio component. Well, what if it comes from food, or there's a competition with other uses? And then I think particularly on those two together, that if you want the shall requirement to be delivered on, so what if you don't have sustainable development impacts for some types of mitigation activities? It doesn't come naturally. And if it's a shall requirement, how to deal with that? There are other ways of doing that, if I can say, in the Integrity Council for VCM. It's a compliance criteria to promote sustainable development. I don't know how it will end here. Just the two last ones. I think a very important improvement of the draft tool is that it's integrated into the activity cycle, the standards. It's not sort of a standalone thing. That means it's also going to be validated and verified and monitored. And that's a huge improvement. And that means also you'll have stakeholder consultation comments taken into consideration in the validation and verification, and I think that makes it very robust. I'm actually, thanks to the supervisory body, I think you're doing a fantastic job. And to the secretariat. And I really hope that this will be different from what it was in the past. Actually, I can't imagine it will not be different. So the last thing is that to use it, there will be the need for capacity building. So host DNAs, it's always was a mandate of DNAs, but as Mbai said, it's not the only thing, but it's still that. So to use it, we need capacity building.
Thank you very much. And I think that was a really helpful journey through the development in time as well from the work on sustainable development. Just shows how far the community has come. And that's great. Christine, do you want to jump in there, and then we'll turn to our last panelist?
Sure, thanks, Amy, and thank you very much for that. I'm not sure how much I can respond to it, but to say thank you very much for the feedback, the positive feedback, as well as the areas where we could improve. Well noted with regard to the positive, including positive impacts in the tool, and also well noted with regard to the capacity building aspect of it. But I'm really glad to hear that you are appreciative of the work that we're doing, and we really are trying very hard to make it a workable tool, an improvement on what we've had in the past, and to make sure that we're addressing all those crucial aspects related to sustainable development, environmental and social safeguards. So thank you. That's all I can say, Amy. Thanks.
That's great.
Maria,
do you want to jump in, Maria?
Yes, thank you. And I do have a comment. Thank you so much for that. I think it's fascinating to hear about the history of how all of this has evolved, knowing that there are many people in the room who do have that CDM experience and carrying it into Article 6. But I'm quite the newcomer, or I consider myself still quite the newcomer into this carbon market. Allow me to say forest. I'm lost in the jungle and I need help. I keep sending SOSs, but no one's there to save me. So I think one thing that I keep hearing when people talk about the CDM and the 6.4 mechanism is a comparison of the two tools and the approaches that have been taken in CDM versus the 6.4, like the Sustainable Development Tool was voluntary and now it's mandatory, and what kind of impacts and effects that could have. But I think what's really important here to just kind of remind ourselves constantly of, and I think we do a very good job of it when we're sitting in the supervisory body, is that everybody under Paris has NDCs and everybody under Paris has commitments that they have made because they are parties to Paris. And so the environment in which we are having these discussions is different because to some degree there is a level of expectation from every possible host and every possible participating party to have something that contributes to what Paris is setting out to do. And I will say that I'm thankful to my fellow supervisory body members, many of whom are in the room today, because for me it was significant capacity building to be sitting in the room with such expertise, listening to their opinions and hearing about the different solutions that are being deployed on different national levels, and then having experts that have more experience with forests than I do, or having experts that have more experience with tech-based solutions than I do is always helpful. And the 300 plus stakeholder inputs for the removals guidance was fascinating to go through with the different perspectives that were put forward. And so I think listening to you walk us through the history is just equally fascinating for me, and I think I really look forward to seeing what comes up next from the supervisory body that I sit in.
Thanks, Maria. And I think when someone says it's fascinating to go through 300 submissions, you understand the dedication of this body. So, Andrea, let's bring this home. Talk about the buyer perspective, and then we'll turn to the audience after we've heard from our two supervisory body members.
Sure. Thanks.
Talk about what the private sector can do to unlock investment and how 6.4 needs to hit that sweet spot for private sector investment, as well as all the other things it's doing.
Sure, and thanks for the opportunity to be on this panel. So the private sector, at least the over 300 ACTA members, want to get involved in carbon markets and especially in the 6.4 mechanism. But to do that, quite obviously, we do need a mechanism that is up and running and operational, and we need that as soon as possible. We don't have much time. I know we say that all the time, but we really need the 6.4 mechanism to make an impact in this decade, this NDC cycle. And in order to do that, we need to have approved methodologies that project developers can work with and be able to register their projects. Since COP26, 2 years ago, the SB has gone through an enormous amount of work, and we heard in the first part of the meeting the SB members highlighting this fact. As an observer, together with my colleague, we watched all the meetings of the SB. We do certify as a third party that indeed the work has been remarkable, especially this year after maybe a slow start last year. So I congratulate on all the members and the Secretariat for the progress achieved so far. And we were all very happy to see an agreement being reached on the two most controversial guidelines, as they were mentioned before, the one on requirements for methodologies and the one with additional requirements for removals. So we urge parties to adopt these recommendations at COP this year, because without that, there will be a further delay of at least a year. We will not be able to have approved methodology until after COP29. And it has been a difficult compromise, and it's a process that works by consensus, so there will never be a document that makes everyone fully happy. We believe what was agreed is an acceptable compromise, and especially because some of the most contentious aspects on removals have been pinpointed for further work next year. And I believe that reopening these decisions this year will really, rediscussing the topics next year for the third year in a row is unlikely to lead to a significantly different outcome. And as I said, it will delay operationalization, but also send the wrong signal about the process and its reliability. So the second point that is very important for the private sector is authorization. So the action by the host country that turns a verified emission reduction into a unit that is good enough for compliance under the Paris Agreement. And it's very clear that for a project developer, for an investor, having authorization versus not having authorization radically changes the economics of a project. So we need to know this as early as possible, and we need these decisions to be firm to limit the cases where countries can make changes to these authorizations and even revoke them. So we were pleased to see that some delegations supported that position in the negotiating room. It's still an option in the text, but we are also sensible to the national prerogatives of countries, and we understand that in some cases there can be a need to make changes to these authorizations. But this has to be in very limited circumstances, and these circumstances need to be known in advance so that the private actors know what they're getting into. And of course, if changes are possible, the risk will be higher, but if the risks are predictable, they will be managed. And well, just to close that, wobbly authorization process will simply lead to higher financing costs, higher project costs, and may lead to foregone opportunities for host countries and local communities. So I hope this is another matter that is sorted this year. And it's really in everyone's interest to get this right. So I'm confident we can get this right this year. And then the last point I want to make is about the need for the 6.4 mechanism to be a competitive crediting mechanism. Unlike the CDM in the early days, 6.4 will not be the only game in town. We have 6.2, but we also have a lot of national and independent crediting mechanisms. This mechanism has a tremendous advantage compared to all the other mechanisms out there. It is under the umbrella of the UNFCCC that is seen by all stakeholders, project developers and buyers as a high bar for quality and integrity. But if using this mechanism versus the alternative becomes too complex and too costly, the overall amount of projects that go through the mechanism may be lower than it could be. And this is just to be clear, this is not about the integrity. All markets are converging towards higher integrity. It's clear, all private actors understand that. But it's more about the speed of the processes, the complexity, the overall cost of credits in a project through the mechanism. So this is really the 3 points I wanted to make. I hope it was clear, and happy to take questions.
Thanks. Yeah, it was clear, and I think that the labour of love that is the Article 6.4 mechanism, the efforts from so many in the room, and then the need to get through it and get to an outcome that is something that everyone can invest in. So thank you very much. Maria, do you want to come in for the last chime? And then we'll turn to the audience.
Thank you very much. And I'll say thank you, Andrea. You have been one of the stakeholders who has been consistently involved and engaged with us, even in all of the stakeholder engagements, through the nights and the long hours and in different time zones. So thank you for that. I will say that our chair, Olga, was a little bit conservative in the hours that she expressed that we spend during our meetings. You said 12 to 14, but I think sometimes we go more than that. In fact, consistently, we go more than that. And I have to say the unsung heroes in all of this are the Secretariat team, because we really couldn't do this without them and without their support. And if we spend 16 hours working, then I think they're working 24/7, because when I get a few hours of sleep, I wake up to text in my inbox that someone had stayed up all night working on, and the very little pieces of night that we get to rest we have considered more annexes than I care to think about. Thousands and thousands and thousands of pages worth of annexes to every single report. We've only been working for 18 months, but we've already concluded 9 SB meetings. And Olga mentioned this in the beginning. We had 6 meetings this year, and so between each meeting we would have only 5 weeks, and the documents have to come out 2 weeks in advance of the meeting, or at least 1 week in advance of the meeting. And that means that our small groups actually meet quite frequently. I've sacrificed many weekends and many times with my family. I know that our meetings coincided with a lot of family birthdays for some of our SB members that they missed to be there. And so I think your assessment was very accurate, that this is truly a labor of love, and it is a labor from technical experts and a bunch of nerds sitting in the room trying to make this work for environmental integrity and for the planet. And we hope to get it as operational as quickly as possible and provide security to the private sector. But we are humans in the end. There's only so much we can do. And we are humans who are very opinionated and very loudly spoken. And it's difficult to get 24 of us to agree to something when we come from such different backgrounds and different opinions. But I think we've done a wonderful job so far, and hoping that you'll continue to engage, and everyone in the room will continue to engage, and we'll get this across the line really as fast as we can, while putting all of the safeguards necessary in place.
I think we should do a round of applause for the dedicated and opinionated members of the board. And I think it's really the fullness of the rooms, including side event rooms late at night, is a witness to how much the carbon communities support the board members in their members in their efforts to get things over the line. Nobody thought this was going to be easy. So let's turn to questions from the floor. We have a roving mic, I think, and if you can introduce yourself and try to direct your question to perhaps one or most 2 people. And bear in mind that some people on this panel are quite tired too. So let's go gently, and let's have some nice questions. Who's brave enough to go first? At the back.
Hi, my name is Rebecca Iwerks. I'm with Namati and the Grassroots Justice Network, and a number of our network members live in communities where they have suddenly found themselves in the middle of carbon markets. And there are a lot of questions about what that means for them and their families, and kind of who is benefiting in that. And so my question is really about the grievance mechanism, and the draft that we saw when they looked at it, really, they weren't assured that they were going to be protected, and that their right, that they're with, especially missing any human rights framework cited in particular, and Indigenous rights, were really concerned. And so I'm just curious, I love the support that you're talking about up here, and I hear about wanting integrity, but there's a gap sometimes in terms of who's bringing that and how that's showing up in some of the documents.
So can I just ask you to clarify your question and who it's to?
So I guess it's to the supervisory body members about the grievance mechanism in particular, and kind of how you're thinking about a rights-based framework in the grievance mechanism. And
I'll just let you know that there are other members of the supervisory body in the front row here to share the load. Okay? So do you want to take that, Maria, Christine?
I can kick us off and also encourage other members to weigh in. So in terms of the status of the appeals and grievance procedure, we did consider it at the last meeting, and we did put it out for public consultation as well, along with the SD tool. And so far, I believe we've received about eight or nine inputs on the appeals and grievance procedure, and those inputs will be taken up when we meet again. Of course, I think we've had a lot of discussions on the document, and the concerns that you've raised have been raised in the discussions as well, to ensure that what we're doing does not negatively affect anyone. So yeah, I think what you're raising is at the forefront of our minds as we consider the document, and we hope that the inputs that we receive from the public consultations will help us in determining how we address that. And I see our chair asking for the mic so she can add in. Thanks.
Right, I'm happy to add because this particular issue that I personally care a lot about. I think you need to consider it in package. We have activity standards, we have project approval procedures, and project cycle. We have several layers of public consultations. We have prior consultation, we have continuous global consultation, we have continuous local consultation, and we have appeals and grievance. And we haven't closed appeals and grievance to make sure that this is verified by the communities and by the stakeholder groups that represent communities. So if they are not finding themselves in any of the documents that we have prepared, we'd like to hear about it. That's why we we kind of put it out in a period when we have the longest period. Please get back with suggestions and very, very specific suggestions. The documents are out there, and we need to know which paragraphs you think are not working and what are your alternative suggestions. We also have discussions on webcast, on record. What we have discussed, issues that we have struggled, technically, we're not quite sure what works best. And so we'd like to hear from stakeholders on the ideas of how they can help us to solve the issues that we have faced, and somehow how to reach out to local communities, translations and stuff. We can't translate in all of the languages, but how do we come up with an instrument that delivers that appeals and grievance procedures to local communities, to Indigenous peoples? We'd like to know your suggestions, because we are only 24 people. We cannot imagine what's needed. We'd like to hear from others.
Thanks, Olga. So let's turn to the next questions. Who's next? I know it's late, but we've got enough minutes to get some good discussions going, and then let our panelists try and find some food. Okay, let's take the lady at the back first, and then we'll come to the lady on the second row.
Yeah, thank you very much. My name is Juliana Kessler from Perspectives Climate Research, and first of all, I would like to congratulate also all the SB members for their hard work. We have been closely following, and we know there have been a few tough moments, so congratulations to that. My question is for the SB members, and specifically on the recommendation for methodologies and removals, because here and there we now have a reference to an additional tool that is going to be developed. And my question would also be, I heard Mbaye, you were saying that you're expecting the first methodologies to be hopefully submitted by the second semester next year. So my question would be, would you say that there is sufficient guidance in the recommendation on methodologies and removals currently included, that project developers and methodology developers can propose those methodologies? Or would you say we still need to develop these tools for a little bit further guidance? And what would you say, provided that the recommendations are adopted by the CMA at this COP, when can we expect those tools more or less? So the additionality tool, reversal risk tool, baseline tool, etc.
Thanks. So does someone want to jump in there from members of the supervisory body? When will we be tooled up in the supervisory body?
I tried to get Kazu to answer it. Right. No, I'm apparently I'm just going ahead. Well, one, we're more than aware of all your inputs on that, so I might throw the question back to you. When do you think we might do it? My only explanation of it is that the methodological guidance is a response to a very tough problem, right? Doing methodologies and additionality in a Paris context. And it's been very, very hard for us to come to an agreement around how one might do that. And we've done it at a fairly high level, and I understand that. I do think it's possible to develop methodologies on the basis of what we have. I imagine, because you've had so many opinions about it, that you probably are best placed to do it. I don't want to sell you, I'm sure there are other people that are able to do it. I do think that we're going to need to have those tools. I think we'll do them during next year, or actually the new members will. And hopefully the guidance that we have has given enough direction to the process that those tools will be relatively easy to implement. I have no doubt there will be tough discussions on them, and we'll need public input. But as I said, I think we've had one big problem. I think we've broken it down into a range of smaller challenges, and this is natural. We will get to the point at which methodologies become a lot easier, but it's going to take the next year.
Thanks, Martin.
Can I
Kazu,
just
do you want to jump
add?
in? Go
Yeah,
for it.
sorry. Thank you for the questions. And again, maybe this was also mentioned by Mubai, that we are also developing the Meso panel, which also assists us in terms of developing those tools. I think, again, with the capacity of 10 members, and I think we need external experts to really support us. I think a Meso panel, and then I think they really bring us all the experts needed, because baseline, additionality, leakage, we are really getting into the quite a specific context, which I think we need such external support. So hopefully we may be able to develop tools as early as possible. But at the same time, I think with the methodology requirement, it also enables project participants to submit new methodology. I think that's first important point. The tools is help to support developing those methodologies. So it doesn't help, doesn't prevent new methodology to be submitted. But at the same time, we recognize those tools will be really help the project proponents to clarify or facilitate what kind of the information and the data is needed in order to demonstrate the baseline, additionality, and also leakage. So we will be hopeful that tools will really develop as early as possible next year with the support of the external experts.
Thanks, Kazu. So let's go to our third question. The lady in the middle of the row, in the second row. Thanks.
Thank you. Hi, thank you for the panel. In full honesty, I'm fairly not too knowledgeable on the Article 6.4, but it was great to be here and listen to you, learning from you and the advancements that have been. I'm Lidia Ruiz. I'm Technical Development Manager in the Integrity Council for the Voluntary Carbon Market, the ICVCM. And my question is for, obviously, the SB members, but also for Pasang. And it's on talking about social safeguards. You rightly pointed out how probably everyone in the room is aware of the importance of the social safeguards and the involvement of Indigenous people, yet as you pointed out, we're not there yet, like still sometimes somehow behind in terms of prioritizing it or getting to the right level of integrity in this aspect, right? In many levels. So, and you also, the chair here pointed out how the SB needs more ideas and points from Indigenous people, right? It is lacking. So my question is, up until today, and this is because of my lack of knowledge, how have you gathered those, that Indigenous people vision in the work that you're doing, and what is your opinion, how the engagement should be improved? What could you do, what could it be done to improve the engagement of Indigenous people in these procedures? Thank you.
Thanks. So Christine, and then let's hear from Pasang.
Thank you very much for the question. So thus far, we've had a number of public consultations on the documents that we consider before each meeting. We have a standard process where our documents are published a couple of weeks in advance of our meetings, and they're open for public consultation. We also do have registered observers that are able to view and participate or interact with us during our SB meetings, and we have had observers from representing Indigenous peoples come and engage with us and let us know their thoughts, etc., which has been very helpful, and we're very grateful for that. As Maria said, we go late into the night sometimes, and they're there engaging with us. So I think and we did have a separate call on the SD tool for engagement from Indigenous people. So I think those are some of the avenues. Our chair can add in additional ones, but in our work, we try our best to make sure that people are aware of what we're doing, that they have access to our discussions, that they're fully transparent, and that they have opportunities to interact and engage with the SB members so that we can include their inputs into our discussion. I think Olga wants to add something, so I'll pass to her.
Yeah, can we just hear from Pasang first on the other half of the question, and we'll come back to Olga. Yeah? Just
Yeah, thank you for the questions. I think this is very, very important. As I also shared earlier, no, that it's very important to learn a lesson from the past experience. No, the past experience in the readiness phase of this RED Plus mechanism should not be forgotten. No, because I was also involved in this RED mechanism in the past, maybe 6-7 years already. I personally feel like in those days, in 2009-8, there was a high engagement. No? Honestly speaking, I represent also work with the Ministry of Forest Environment, representing indigenous people. In those days, initially, it was a very low level of engagement of indigenous people, but slowly it increased, and I still remember those days that I was in the ministry, I was alone representing different divisions, but I was alone, and my visibility was hardly been seen in the initial phase. But slowly, I in the span of 2 to 3 years, I could see we could see the champion within the ministry for acknowledging the importance of indigenous people in this mechanism, working on the CESA, social environmental safeguards, and on all that. And that is a positive aspect because it's been started discussing the indigenous people issues within the ministry also. But however, when I really see at the moment, in the carbon mechanism, real working on the grounds, I do not see that engagement, unfortunately, because I work at the community level, national level, also at the global level. I really, we hardly see it, and I really feel, honestly speaking, that the carbon markets in discussion in the paper going really as I said, also in Asia Climate Week, that really like a bullet train, but the engagement process is like a crawling stage on the ground. So, and it's a big gap, and it doesn't work in long run. The more the gap, more the challenges remain, and more the challenges, more misunderstand, and ownership is not there. If we do not have ownership on this process, I do not think we will have a good future. So to build the ownership, engagement, participations, and meaningful engagement is very, very necessary. And I was just also looking at because this Paris Agreement is also achieving the emission reduction, but also adaptation target for NDC. When we see that, we really need to see in the process of NDC submission how indigenous people and local communities are engaged. And this is the question for all of us to reflect back. In FWG's LCIP assessment, very, very low, and this is also important to see, in the target of achieving NDC in the sector of forestry, energy, transportations, and when you talk about the energy, there's another big gap. I do not have much time to explain on that one. Maybe when we meet, maybe in a few days. In forestry sectors, is another big things to deal with, land issues, tenure issues, our customary governance issues. These things need to be dealt with very, very meaningful way and very, very interactive way, and so that everybody, all the, especially indigenous people as the right holders who are the safeguards of the forestry, not just only as a participator and beneficiaries, but the key actors in the decision making, especially building this grievance mechanism, and also, including free, prior, informed consent.
Okay, thank you very much. So, and I think we've heard really clearly about particularly the meaningful engagement, making sure that at every level it's a full engagement, and free, prior, informed consent, and the role of grievance as well. So thank you very much. I know, Olga, you want to add a few words, but I'm also wanting to take some other questions. So can I see how many questions we've got? Because we've only got a few minutes left. So we've got one question over there. Any more? So, Olga, if you can be brief so we can go to our last question, that'd be fab.
Yeah, I'll be brief because we had a separate call where we asked the indigenous people, the local communities, how they would like to work with us. Like, we have a separate call on that. And in our stakeholder engagement, you can see the submissions on that call. So we are interested in what ideas were submitted. There's those ideas. Wilson, Bai, and I, we work directly with the constituencies registered here as the Indian process as chairs of constituent bodies.
Okay, thanks. So let's go to that last question in the corner. Yeah.
Sure, hi, thanks. And thanks to all the panelists, Eric Lennon from CL, the Center for International Environmental Law. A couple questions. One, I'm glad to hear that you got a number of submissions on the grievance mechanism. I would argue that there would probably be quite a bit more on both that and the sustainable development tool if the consultation period was less than a month long and not in the lead up to COP. And so I would encourage you to continue taking submissions on that and to continue hearing from people and communities, especially as many of the people who probably want to engage in that were also busy preparing for this. I think it's great, and I'm hearing a lot of agreement on wanting to make sure that there's more integrity and that the Article 6.4 mechanism isn't repeating the harms. But I also see, particularly in the recommendations on removals, there's a lot of work still left to be done, and a lot of work left to be done on things that will help prevent those harms, both related to environmental integrity, related to risk of reversals, related to obviously the sustainable development tool and protecting human rights, and also this need to operationalize. And I see a problem there if you're saying we need to operationalize this, but if you operationalize it by approving those recommendations and potentially activities start coming, if that's going to be something that happens, then those could be really risky if you don't have all of those standards in place. And so I guess, I know the supervisory body has it it's in the document that more work is to be done, but I guess how are you going to make sure that sort of activities involving removals in particular aren't going forward without having all of those things in place?
Maria, do you want to handle that one quietly at the end, or do you want me to pass it to someone on the floor?
Unfortunately for me, I also co-chair the small group on removals, and my fellow co-chair is not here. So thank you for your question, and thank you for continuously showing up. I do know that you have interacted with us as an observer quite a bit, and I thank you for your dedication. I think the reason why we have a lot of instances in the document where we indicate that more work needs to be done is simply because more work needs to be done, and we ran out of time. And the CMA asked for general guidance on removals, and it is impossible to put forth a general guidance on removals that has all of the safeguards that are necessary, that are applicable to all kinds of removal types, to the degree of scrutiny that perhaps the international community wants. But it's what we want too. It's just that we can't do it with the mandate that we were given. And so we need the CMA to kind of tell us the direction that you're going in with this generic guidance on removal is okay, and we want you to do the further work so that we can do the further work. And when we say operationalization, I don't think that means that we're going to get all types of projects all at once. I think it means that we need to provide the opportunities for some projects to come in, and then like our chair said in the beginning of the fireside chat, is we do have activities transitioning from the CDM, and those activities are going to be using CDM methodologies until 2025, and it is absolutely not our intention to either strand those activities without any methodology to use at 2025, or trigger a need for a CMA discussion on interim solutions because the supervisory body doesn't have anything for those activities to use. So what we're saying here is that we're hoping that it will be a cooperative approach internationally to get this mechanism operational, where we can continue working where we've indicated there is a need for more work. We can start revising through the METH panels the existing methodologies for the activities that are transitioning to align them with the methodology guidance that we hope is going to be accepted at CMA in this COP. And then we can have methodologies prepared for those projects to switch to in 2025, whilst working as fast as humanly possible to get the rest of the guidance up and running. But I will say also that we are a technical body in the 6.4 SB, and things perhaps are not considered by CMA from a technical perspective, which adds a level of complexity in terms of what kinds of recommendations we can make to the CMA in order for those recommendations to get operationalized on the ground to allow us as a supervisory body to continue our technical work in the direction that parties would like us to. And so I hope that that balance does not go unnoticed, and that we have taken as much care as possible in what we have put forward in order to make it something that, while many would not be completely happy with, it would be enough to get us to the next step. And I say next step because it's not and it's operational. There's still a lot of work that needs to be done.
And so, our next step is to thank our panelists and thank the supervisory body for their work and the secretariat for their work too. A round of applause, please. Have a lovely evening, everybody, and I hope the people who need a bed get some sleep.